Picasso said, learn the rules like a pro, so you can break them like an artist. How does this approach apply to your specific field or expertise? As a prep cook, I can tweak the official recipes to make them taste better, but I need to get the basic proportions right. Architecture. You need to comprehend the regulations, requirements, briefs and technicalities to be able to execute your design ideas around them. You can only think out of the box if you know limits of the box. And then the structural engineer has to cram everything back into the box or rearrange what the box is, or build another box so the whole dang thing doesn't come crashing down. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has dozens of known positions for attack and defense and hundreds of individual techniques for those specific positions. Knowing how to execute one of those techniques correctly in the appropriate situation is part of training. But in actual competition, chaos ensues, especially at a higher level of competition. The active opponent constantly changes things. The high-level competitor has to abort in the middle, switch to the next move, adjust, change, switch and adjust some more. There's a right way to do the technique, but the artists at the higher levels rarely do it that way. I was hoping someone would bring up martial arts. I've been training BJJ for a while now, and once you've been training long enough you learn that the rules you learned as a white and blue belt can be broken in certain situations. You constantly have to be innovative and think on the fly to beat anyone who knows what they're doing. I draw cartoons as a hobby. People are often surprised that I can draw real pictures. I want to scream. Knowing how to draw realistically helps me with cartoons, because I know how to do body proportions, facial expressions, hair texture, body language, fabric, and how to minimalize a complex drawing into cartoon form. I once heard a style is making a mistake consistently on purpose. I've known some people who are opposed to learning music theory because they don't want to be locked into those rules, but in reality knowing the rules of theory just helps you break them in more interesting ways. Yup, looking back to when I was younger, I did a lot of things in creative ways because I didn't know theory, but also a lot of unpleasant music that would sound way better if I knew theory back then. In computer programming, if you know the low-level nuts and bolts for how the computer works, you can know when to selectively ignore best practices, or even basic safety features, for the sake of getting a slim, sexy optimization working. Example, a friend of mine working with graphics drivers found that he could eke out improved turnaround on frame flipping, that is, sending a picture to the screen to be displayed, by having the writer for the next frame trail the reader for the frame before it as they scanned the same block of memory, so at any given time, that block of memory would actually contain portions of 2 or more separate frames, and the only thing keeping the pictures looking right was the fact that he could assume one piece of code would never catch up to the other. Bioinformatics is the art of being super lazy. Don't want to run more lab experiments to figure out a thing? Just work out a novel way to analyze the data you already have from doing something else unrelated to the question at hand, or even someone else's data that you have lying around. Or, as I like to remind my boss during budget discussions, lab work is expensive, computer time is cheap. I do payroll. There's lots of ways to fix a payroll error, but only one correct way typically, and those usually involve amendments cause clients don't understand when the quarter closes and how taxes work. So, I work in the culinary field. I spent several years in culinary school before training to become a chef, and now I run my own kitchen with about 30 employees under me. We serve between 300 and 500 people at lunch and dinner each day. Honestly, if I hadn't gone to learn all of the basics, like how to make a simple sauce, how to base my timing, and how to season food well, I never would have been able to get to a level where I'm at today. Nowadays, recipes are more like guidelines than anything else, except for baking, of course. Basically, I'll look at what's on the menu for the day, and I will know how to play with it and tease it and make it taste delicious, while still being within the nutrients and caloric guidelines. You can't ever play with stuff and become an artist if you don't learn how to draw in the first place. It's one of the things I love the most about my job, that I've been doing it for long enough now where I'm able to play with it really well. It's taken a decade to even get to this point, and I still have much further to go, but I'm thrilled with the progress I've made in that time alone. A very common lesson of contemporary marketing is that nearly every rule is breakable. For example, during testing, I often find that, unsurprisingly, the most optimal digital ad features an attractive young white woman. But you need to test every time, because last week my most successful ad featured a dude facing away from the camera, doing a cartwheel. I am a dude and once did a cartwheel. I'd love a job, please. I'm a singer and vocal coach. You should never push your voice too high or loud to the point of your voice breaking or cracking, as it can cause damage. That being said, if you do it just right or just a little bit, it can make people cry or give a standing ovation if it's just at the right moment to evoke emotion, or even sometimes to cover a weakness in your voice at a certain point of the song, enough to make it sound like a strength. One time got stuck in a YouTube hole of vocal coaches reacting to some popular grunge and other types of music. A lot of comments from the vocal coach were along the lines of, "I definitely wouldn't teach this, but what this artist just did was masterful." I used to work in IT and there is a skill to slacking off. It's a stressful environment, but when you kinda know what your performance targets are, you can game the system a little bit and do just enough work to fly under the radar and not be bothered much. Working from home has been such a treat for people working in IT. Offices are generally quite rude and abusive towards programmers and coders. Depends on the environment. I've worked in software where the devs were the backbone of the company and highly respected. I was in sales and seen as dispensable. I've also worked in offices where the devs are treated like aliens. My sales position, however, was seen as more vital. Weird. D&D. Anyone who's played for a while can relate. You learn the rules as a new player, but get more relaxed as you play longer, especially when you're about to do a cool stunt of some kind, or you learn how to exploit them without breaking them. I apply the same philosophy to Magic: The Gathering. Best description one my friend said about MTG is, it's a game with rules and cards to break those rules. Dentist. Naturally, there's certain rules you don't ever break. But when it comes to cosmetics aesthetics, you pretty much do become an artist that has to work within some mechanical boundaries. Dental tech here who does work for y'all. We do it on our end to a degree. I know how to actually write code, so I know what to copy from Stack Overflow. That, or I know how to not overbuild my software given my constraints, use case, and resources. Absolutely this LMAO. People massively underestimate how much Googling goes into coding. Like, no, I can't do that specific thing, but give me some time with Stack Overflow and I'll get it working. I make bespoke clothing. Usually it doesn't involve design. I am a terrible designer, but it does involve a lot of creative problem solving. Because part of why clothing designed for one person looks terrible on another person comes down to the rules of fit and construction. Ergo, if I want to make something to spec that will fit and flatter my client and not make them look like a duck in a trash bag, I have to know how clothing is put together in order to know where I can hack and slash the pattern in order to get it to work. Where to add, subtract, change shape, raise, lower, rearrange entirely, only works when you know why it worked in the first place. Now take it up a notch. Cosplay. Video game designers drawing and animating costumes that do not work the way they work in animation, and now someone wants it to be real and fit their body. The amount of problem solving involved would break a lesser man. Now you're throwing not just the rules of making clothing into it, but the laws of physics. Knowing what will still work if you fiddle with it, and what will absolutely not work because the laws of physics sadly cannot be broken, is right up Picasso's alley. Can I dye plastic with RIT dye? Surprisingly, maybe. Can I dye wet look PVC vinyl? Absolutely not. Can I build this coat without having any visible stitching on the outside? Dang right I can. Can I make this skirt look like it's floating and also hide the zipper? Probably, but it's going to cost you. I used to have an alteration lady who tailored all my clothes, and she made me look fantastic and everything. Worth every cent. Then I moved cities and I've never found anyone as talented. Go to grad school. Become a professor. Now any idea you have or new methodology you want to implement is gonna be received with appreciation instead of a stick to the program. And it worked. I have been able to implement and experiment with a lot of new class styles in university. Working at a school, they always told me to stick to the methods the government suggests and do not experiment with new things, cause if it goes bad that means lost time. Oh man. I worked with lots of servers at my old job. Very big company. My title was system administrator, but what I actually did was far from it. I was more on the software side for a very specific program. Most of the work orders we got was to set this program up. Something we've done a million times. So some people would take their time with those work orders and say it took them 10 minutes to complete one. Which in all fairness was a good baseline. You could do one server in a few minutes, but most requests had like 3 servers. I made scripts to automate my work. So one server would take me 10 seconds depending on the network. I abused my scripts. I was by far the laziest person there, but I did 90% of the work. They loved me. Well, like all giant tech companies, they laid off like 100k people. There was like 450k people working at the company, and this was pre-COVID. And so my workload increased significantly. Not only did the amount of work request increase, but we also had to learn a new product, one that works with our program. One of our biggest accounts threw work orders at us that had hundreds of servers on a single request. Not only was that annoying, but onboarding for this account took half a year. There was only 2 people on the account at the time, so we were getting buried in work. I ended up making my pride and joy script. This script not only did all the work with our original scope of work, but it also did all the work for the new product as well. When I coded that script, I made sure to add how long it took to complete the work. I think on average it was like 7 minutes from start to finish for one work order, whereas without automation, it would take the whole week, if not longer. I only did it so I wouldn't have to work as hard. I had it down to a science. I would wake up at 5, log into my work computer at 6, crank the volume, right click the screen. Worked on Linux. Right clicking would prevent the screensaver from coming up, locking my computer and showing me as away, and went back to bed. If anyone pinged me, I could hear it. I would usually wake up and actually look at emails around 10. Frick that place. Work smarter, not harder, people. The IT field in general is just a massive competition to see who can do the least work and not pee off the end users or management. I think I do pretty good if the frequency of additions to my comment history over the past 2 days between 8 AM and 5 PM says anything. In my long career in IT so far, rules are in place to keep users, mainly, from doing something stupid, a bit like warning labels on products. Also, you'll see a spectrum of levels of talent when you gain expertise, probably in most any field, and some will set up roadblocks or tests, especially in job interviews, to see whether you really know your crap or that you just freshly emerged from the A+ exam or agile workshop you went to a boot camp for over this past weekend. Gaining that level of pro-level skill for some can make them less a technician and more an artist, to Picasso's words. Yes, there is roads and slow and steady wins the race in textbook practices, but an artist tends to make non-linear intuitive hops on the path toward solving a problem where someone competent but not beyond that level of technical competence will perhaps be content, or afraid to not do things variously by the book. I'm convinced that the final level in IT is being able to write a bash script without opening Stack Overflow. Most fluid mechanics problems are too complex to solve for real applications, so you have to know the physics like the back of your hand to make assumptions or apply empirical equations appropriately. Same goes for most engineering. Frictionless pipe FTW. Sci-Fluid Mech was great. A good GM/DM should learn the raw for the system they are playing so that they can make homebrew encounters, items, classes that don't ruin your game. And be able to make crap up on the fly that also doesn't just ruin your game. So many medications have off-label uses. When you learn medications, you learn how to use them for specific properties. But so many medications have other uses and you pick these tips and tricks up as you go. Like how Viagra was originally created to treat heart problems. It just so happened to have an interesting side effect which now seems to be the main use of the drug instead. Being a teacher of any foreign language, the first thing they teach is that there is no one right method for teaching a language. So we basically learn as much foundational knowledge as we can so that we're able to mix and match and create new games and lesson plans. I'm a high school physics teacher, and I've found that when you're training because your mentors teach you based on their experience, you find that a lot of their rules don't apply and a lot of teaching staples are complete nonsense. For example, teachers swear by the idea that you should have a red, amber, green level system to your questions, so the weak kids can do red and the top tier kids do green. But why should the weak kids do red? Why can't they do amber? What do I need to do as a teacher to get them doing green? And it's almost like saying you're not smart enough to do the top stuff. Another example is learning styles. Research shows that the idea that people are visual or kinesthetic learners is balls, but 91% of teachers, or something similar, believe in it, when actually it's not true, and you do more harm because children believe that's the only way they'll learn. TDLR. Teaching. Because there are bulls teachers out there who care more about what's best for them rather than what's best for their kids. I am in IT security in this learn the rules like a pro, so you can break them like an artist, is the everyday bread and butter. I look through the curriculum provided by the district thoroughly. I look at everything they want me to do in detail and then promptly disregard it. Most curriculum is teaching to a state test, and I loathe the state test. I prefer to teach them to think and analyze and question. We just spent 3 days analyzing author's purpose, mood and character motivation by watching War of the Worlds. I prefer to teach them to think and analyze and question. Thank you. Seriously, thank you. I'm a professional editor proofreader. I used to format every casual text DM with the utmost precision. Back in high school, I joked that improper punctuation gives me hives. What was I trying to prove? Who was I trying to impress? I'm 27 now and don't give a frick. If it's not work related, I let my thumbs be sloppy lil BBC. I truly give zero fricks. Not 100% relevant. Never thought about it before now, though. Free the sloppy lil bitch thumbs movement. As a former musician who teetered on the edge of experimental music, this always got me. One band I was in had like 10 members at any given point, so we'd have to recruit horn players all the time from the local prestigious college music program. Some of them would come screeching and skonking their free jazz craziness but could not hold down a fat horn pocket to save their lives. We would always look at each other and wonder, how did these kids skip from jazz standards to Miles Davis without learning the basics of how when to play? The old man in the band always said, I hate the rules too, but you have to know them before you can break them. In competitive Super Smash Bros there are some things that are generally too aggressive and unsafe, but at a certain point it can be a good mix up for the opponent, who will say something like, I can't believe they would go for that, or I can't believe he did that 4 times in a row. Did he just walk up and... I'm a writer. Contrary to what most folks on the internet would tell you, how you write is incredibly important. In fact, the way in which something is written often matters more than the content of the words themselves. Consider the following sentence. Steve looked into the restaurant and saw a man devouring chicken. With the inclusion of a single hyphen, we get something completely different. Steve looked into the restaurant and saw a man devouring chicken. That's just one example. Here's another. His eyes went wide. Come on, people, he shouted. If we omit that vocative comma, which so many people do, we get this. His eyes went wide. Come on people, he shouted. As you can see, that single comma prevented quite a mess. You get the point by now. It's absolutely essential to know the fundamental rules which govern the written word. Unfortunately, you have to already know them before you can appreciate why they're so important, meaning that many folks never bother to learn them and never get the full benefit from whatever they read. After all, a lot of those rules seem contradictory or confusing on the surface, and many people feel like they have better things to do than figure out why it isn't actually an exception to the mandate about possessive apostrophes. Here's the thing, though. Once a person is an absolutely perfect writer, they can make use of language's inherent nuances and eccentricities to great effect. One of my favorite examples of this showed up in Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's unpleasantly like being drunk. What's so unpleasant about being drunk? You ask a glass of water. Put another way, a bad writer can describe a man devouring chicken. A good writer can describe a man devouring chicken. And a good writer who's intentionally channeling a bad one can describe a man being drunk. I'll let you decide what role the chicken played in that last clause. TL. DR. There's a stark difference between bad writing and bad writing. Yeah, definitely. An English teacher in early high school, late middle school, age 12ish for those non-Americans, once that you have to learn the rules of writing, i.e. grammar and spelling, before you can break them, and I've mostly found that to be pretty accurate. If you don't learn how to write properly, you don't have the skills necessary to break the rules effectively. More like an hobby, but it works for competitive Pokemon. If you can understand what would be the best course of action, and you are aware your opponent does too, you can plan on how to make a suboptimal, yet unexpected move and win the match by making seemingly bad plays. Interestingly, this also causes pros to make some interesting flubs when they play against beginners, until they realize they're challenging a beginner and adjust accordingly. Music theory composition. Music majors will spend 2 years in music theory classes and typically another year in orchestration or form and analysis, all to just analyze pieces by Bach and these other great composers where they literally don't follow any of the rules. Can't have parallel fifths? Bach does. Can't use tritones in operatic songs? Wagner does with a Tristan chord. Shouldn't use dissonant melodies or 12-tone methods? Let me introduce you to Stravinsky and Schoenberg. Music theory is a lie. I haven't measured anything I've cooked for a few years now. I have a general idea of how much a tablespoon cup etc is and just eyeball it. Haven't had a single complaint. Please, aspiring cooks, measure your baking ingredients until you know what you're doing. It's the same principle in cooking. Learn the basics to make stuff taste good. Learn how to cut an onion and sear a steak. Broaden your ability with various styles until you're comfortable with it. When you can do Italian, French, Vietnamese, BBQ, Mexican, Indian, to the point where everyone is always happy, then start screwing around with things and come up with your own recipes. It's real rewarding to have things unique to you that people rave about, especially when you are making a living off it. Source: I make people food professionally. Know what customer service is to the highest degree so that when a customer is a complete dong, you can be a dong back and not get fired. Pretty much everyone who learns music theory and composes themselves uses this motto. Even learning the history of music follows this. For example, whilst Bach did not create rules for himself, he composed in such a way that became the standard for his era. Debussy took all of those rules and the composers before him and stuck 2 fat middle fingers to it. He doesn't follow many rules. Heck, he didn't even like his music to be called music because he felt he was so above with his genius. A little arrogant, but I think Picasso would be proud. I work at an overdose prevention site, and for those who don't know, it's exactly what it sounds like, a site people can go do drugs at, and if they overdose we revive them using Narcan. With that being said, a million policies are in place so these sites can exist. Most people hate drug users and don't understand addiction is really just a side effect of the first world. Not that it doesn't exist in other countries, just significantly less. And Western societies are actually quite robotic and industrial. It makes sense why some people are on drugs. Anyways, half the time the people who work at these places come from their own experience, so when you're reviving life after life and breaking policy to meet the needs of other people, you kind of come to this thorough understanding that we are all just insignificant specks experiencing profoundly significant moments. And as someone who won't be remembered and works through an industry made up of policies, my only real goal in life is to support the complex and fluctuating process of the human experience. That's beautifully breaking the rules to me, I suppose. I'm a recovery support specialist recovery coach. This means I have lived with the issues that face my people, so I guess in a way that's breaking rules right there, because professionals are not taught how to share their story, and sharing your story is an art form. I learned the rules of professional behavior: keep yourself to yourself, don't get personal, keep your distance, and then I do the opposite. I have boundaries. I have a code of ethics. I have professional standards. I get to show heart, empathy and understanding to people going through it because I lived it too. For math, I can say that one should learn the basics, but you need to be creative and clever. Think outside the box maybe, to be successful in both academia or related fields, because the rules they teach at school are mostly mediocre but are kept in course for pedagogical reasons. So to be great at any field of math, you need to explore the field yourself a lot. If If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.